Welcome to Tish Talk with Tish Conlon. Let's talk health, healing, politics and geopolitics, history, spirituality, money, finance, world news, science, technology, conspiracies. Let's talk. Tish Talk.
Welcome, everybody, for this great live stream event. I have an exceptional guest on my Tish Talk show. Some of you who don't know Tish Talk, please just hit the like button to help with our reach. We have some incredible guests in the past, present, and future coming up. Very, very honored to have Matthew Ehret here. Matthew Ehret, for those of you who don't know him, is a Canadian Patriot, and he and his wife have become friends as well. He's the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review, which you can check out. He has incredible content, guys, and co-founded the Rising Tide Foundation. And he's the author of so many incredible historical books, The Untold History of Canada, which I think every single Canadian should read, particularly if you want to step into the political realm. So I was a student of his books there, as well as I think his most famous and well-known set, The Clash of the Two Americas. Fascinating. He was aware of the deep state influences throughout history. And this is not just 10, 20 years. These are hundreds of years and longer back. And he's documented that and the real history. So this is a real treat. And if we have time, we're going to cover current geopolitical events, some of them quite concerning, as well as take a little bit of a historical deep dive into this enigma for a lot of us, Iran. So welcome, Matt. How are you today?
Hey, Tish. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm doing very well. How are you?
Oh, good. And congratulations appearing on, I'm just saying that the High Wire show, is it? Or yeah, that's fantastic. For those who don't know, Matt has done a lot of work on the occult and some of the symbolism, particularly what we saw in the Olympics. And he's got a series coming out as well, a book series, which you can check out. Is it called Revenge of the Mystery Cults or something like that?
You got it, Tish. Yeah, it's going to be a 3-volume book series tackling different aspects of this nasty little parasite that's been latched on and that operates through different mystery cults, initiatory societies that goes back to the pre-Christian era in a big way. And we're going to map some of that out over the next the 2,000 years since the murder of Jesus to the present, and just showcase how this needs to be understood if we're going to appreciate what is this thing that's been labeled deep state past, but that didn't just originate in the last 5-10 years. This has been going on for this whole time. So yeah, right. we'll try to do a little deep dive on that.
Excellent. We'll have to have you on the show. So let's start off with obviously concerning events with Ukraine, Biden giving permission to strike deep into Russia. Can you give some context to that? That's the hot concerning event for many people around the world right now. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is very concerning indeed. And I mean, we are just what is it now? November 20th. We are 6-7 weeks. When is the president inaugurated? It's the 20th of January, right? So yeah, this is about 2 months before the inauguration. I think this probably needs to be modified in the future. If we make it through the current crisis, then I think that the inauguration should happen a lot more in closer proximity to the actual date of the victory of an election. And I agree that it takes some time to do a transition. There's a lot of bureaucracy, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity when you extend it to really kick over the chessboard. And I think that that's what's happening right now. And I don't necessarily think that Biden per se was making decisions. I don't think he's been making decisions for a very long time, but there are operators very, very influential ones who have been managing this puppet character. I'm looking here at people like Blinken, Sullivan, who are likely more responsible than not for the approval to Kiev to utilize American ATACMSs, these long-range rockets that have been supplied to Kiev by the United States to strike deep into Russian territory, which in fact there has been a reported strike in the Bryansk region just this morning or last night. We don't exactly know how Russia is going to respond. There will be a response of some sort. What makes this especially dangerous, I mean, it's disappointing on the one hand, because we did have this already a couple of months ago when this began, and, you had France and Germany and then Canada all giving their endorsement, saying that this is what should happen, is Kiev should be allowed to attack Russia directly, utilizing foreign weapons. But Putin also made the point, he wasn't quiet about this, saying that, look, if this happens, then we know that Kiev doesn't have the specializations, the training, the manpower, the means, the knowledge of actually launching these missiles on target, or the satellite infrastructure in place to direct the missiles to hit a target. So if this actually does happen, we know that the majority of those who are implementing, utilizing, controlling, managing, and targeting, on top of providing the weapons, are all going to be tied directly or to the US directly and NATO more broadly, which is very, very dangerous.
Foolish to the extreme. I mean, in Canada, what happened to our peacekeeping, background and national, respect on the international stage? We have Trudeau pushing airstrike into Russia, and then you have Polyev, Trudeau and Singh coalition, but then you have Polyev pushing striking into Iran, which is also equally foolish. Two of the top, there's military power, certainly nuclear in Russia. What do you foresee could be happening over the next few weeks in that particular situation?
Well, I'm most sincerely hoping that cooler heads can prevail, and so far the amount of level-headed restraint has been almost superhuman coming from Iran and from Russia. I mean, the amount of provocations that we have seen of targeted cyber attacks, the murdering, the assassination of various Iranian scientists, the amount of provocations onto Russia as well have been astounding. And there has not been the much proclaimed for predictions of Iranian retaliation onto Israel, whether for a variety of strikes. There was a tit for tat, but there was not the type of retaliation we expected after, especially a certain ambassador was killed. An Iranian ambassador, not an ambassador, an embassy was struck on Iranian territory as well as on Lebanese territory, and there was a variety of things back and forth that could have been World War III. We also had Soleimani, who was killed back in 2020, January 3rd, the top general of the Quds, the Iranian forces, who was killed by a drone attack. This largely sabotaged an already ongoing peace process to broker a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Trump actually had a very important role to play in that. And this was happening in Iraq, where the Saudis, the Iranians, who had seen their all diplomatic channels broken in an effort to try to get a Shia versus Sunni war. Of course, Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Iran is Shia. And that's been the way that the geopolitical manipulators, who have also taken control of the Western governments of the world, have been trying to initiate forever wars in the Middle East. Is they've been utilizing this idea of, okay, we're going to promote special relationships with Sunni governments that have a lot of oil, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Egypt to a certain extent. And at the same time, we're going to sick them against the Shia countries, Iraq, Syria, Iran. Afghanistan's more Sunni.
Is it?
Oh, no. Well, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Taliban, of course. That's a variation. Exactly. You're right. They got a bit of a bad rap. anyway, that's a whole other weird,
Yeah,
messy one.
I mean, and we had it was at Abraham Razi mysteriously killed in a helicopter crash.
Well, Raisi of Iran, yeah, that
Yes,
was very recently, just last year, no,
yes.
not even 9 months ago. Yeah, so I mean, there's all of these things, these provocations, and we've seen them withhold. And I think it is known that if they can just simply hold back and wait till Trump is inaugurated on January 20th, no matter what provocations happen, it's a good bet that at least on the front of the Russian angle, there will be a lot of pressure to stop funding and providing weapons to Ukraine to serve as a proxy in this war that could be amplified into a world war. So Trump has made it known that he will not be providing the type of blank check and infinite support to Ukraine. I believe that it's generally understood from the Chinese and the Iranians too that Trump is looking for business arrangements, which means points of stable, environments in which real discussions about creating business opportunities, investments into infrastructure can actually occur. He's a lot more of a pragmatic thinker in that sense, not so ideologically driven as some of these, globalist technocrats are, who are just absolutely religiously driven to have world control at all costs, even if it means launching thermonuclear weapons to destroy anybody who doesn't want to get rid of their sovereignty for the sake of a one world government. Trump doesn't necessarily think that way. So I think that there's a good bet that they're going to hold back any serious response. Although, again, Russia did just announce a completely new or a revamped nuclear security doctrine as far as how Russia would utilize, what's the philosophy that they will utilize their nuclear warheads, and as part of their deterrence program, which for the first time ever, as of this week, Putin has announced that they are permitting themselves the right to use their nuclear weapons, even if they are not attacked by conventional nuclear weapons, speaking directly towards what's being done utilizing Ukraine, but also space-based weaponry that's been built up with capabilities of launching a variety of weapons. I think directed energy beams, but also possibly covert missiles from space onto Russian or Chinese territory. So that's another consideration that is now being brought into real geopolitical decision making, and that's a factor too.
Yeah, very troubling. And I know Putin has said a number of times that he would respect a peace negotiation with Trump. But take our audience back, for those who aren't aware of some of the historical context in this particular geopolitical situation with Russia and Ukraine. There was a commitment not to have NATO in Ukraine. And for Russia, it's an existential threat. And Russia's not been allowed into NATO. I think at one point they were posturing to get in, but they were never allowed. There was always this fight against Russia, even though Russia has been historically a friend of the West, helped the US. And so this whole Minsk agreement was broken. Can you take just a short lesson for people? What the heck? How did it get so bad? Why are we at this point now? It didn't just happen overnight.
No, it's been a process. And, if you look at the Ukrainian economy and how it's been destroyed over the last 30 years, this couldn't be done by incompetence. Even if you were incompetent, you couldn't get this level of self-destruction to the Ukrainian economy, considering that back in 1990, Ukraine was, I believe, the highest quality, it had the highest GDP per capita of all Eastern European countries. It was still part of the Soviet bloc at the time, but it was a vacation capital of the world. People would travel from all over to vacation on the Black Sea. Extremely powerful industrial economy, a massive amount of abundance, an incredible
agriculture
breadbasket. Yeah, I mean the agriculture is astounding. It still is an extremely important agricultural zone, even despite the conflict, but it was really a hub of affluence and abundance. And as soon as you had the self-destruction of the Soviet Union, and that happened for some very understandable reasons. There was a very rigid system. It was very, very top heavy, especially where all of the technology was concentrated in the military sector. and the Soviet system under its rigidity didn't have the ability to translate a lot of those technologies into spin-offs that would benefit the civilian sector. So there was a lot of obsolete tech in agriculture and in industry, which was utilizing 1950s technology in the 1980s when they didn't have to. They just didn't have the type of flexibility needed to have that edge, although they did have advanced science on an incredible level. Energy-wise, Ukraine also had one of the most important high-tech nuclear science sectors anywhere in Europe. Very, very high quality. And anyway, all of that became, like all of the Soviet countries, that was annihilated. That was privatized in the 90s, overseen by the IMF, the World Bank, that demanded that the new economy would be this absolute radical this perversity of capitalism, where all of a sudden people who'd never known capitalism in their living experience, all of a sudden were told that now you're capitalists. They didn't know what to do with that information. And only those who were part of the special clubs who had been brainwashed in Harvard or in Oxford and then sent back to their homeland in Ukraine were given the authorization to thus own, as was the case in Russia, former state enterprises for pennies on the dollar. And you had a policy of shock therapy, of austerity that didn't just hit Russia, it hit all across these former satellite countries. And the Ukrainian economy just started really going down. And at the same time, as you had this destruction of living standards and a humiliation, that always creates a cultural environment that favors racist bigotry and certain latent movements that had formerly been very negligible fringe organizations in the 1970s and 80s that idealized certain Nazi collaborators like Stefan Bandera, Mykola Lebed. Here I'm referring to the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. They were a non-political factor in the 1970s and 80s in Ukraine. It was non-factor. By the early 90s, you had things like the Svoboda Party. The Pravi sector began to be formed soon thereafter. And these various groups were, walking around goose-stepping, doing Hitler swastika Sig Heils, and modeling themselves off of those who followed the fascist Stefan Banderites, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists that were working with the Nazi SS. Even Chrystia Freeland's own grandfather was a big part of this, a major propagandist during World War II, printing, Hitler propaganda in Ukraine, helping to rally and murder Slavs and Jews and gay people for the Reich, in the service of the Reich. And again, so these neo-Nazi groups, second, third generation, started gaining power. You had the C-14 party as well. These groups of thugs that would go around and just bash the heads of people who were political resistance of any sort, lighting offices of political parties on fire. And this got worse and worse into 2003. After 9/11, we started seeing in Eastern Europe a real push by the followers, the associates of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who were operating through CIA front groups like the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a self-admitted CIA front set up in the early 80s by Reagan. And it started going to work in a heavy way, weaponizing mass mobs of poor people in different countries you want to destabilize. And I'm saying you by not you, the CIA. And what they would do is they would use the language of human rights. And of course, oftentimes there would be a touch of truth. There would be economic injustice in whatever country you want to target. Usually that economic injustice, in the case of Ukraine, as one example, is happening because their economy was consciously sabotaged, which by the IMF and the World Bank and international bankers speculating against their currencies, destroying their ability to have sustainable living standards for their people. And the people don't know any better. They don't know. Most of the blue collar people suffering have no idea what is causing.
They're being played on both sides, really. They don't understand.
Exactly.
The average person doesn't know. They're turning to someone who seems to be fighting for them, but they're actually been funded by a group that wants total destabilization, and they want chaos and rioting violence. And the other group, that these oligarchs, they've been funded as well by the same.
Yeah, it's a gang called gang counter gang operation. And we saw this with George Saakashvili, who was a Harvard trained, Soros funded technocrat in 2003, who was sent back to Georgia first to lead a color revolution. And that's one of the techniques of sort of a hypnotic sales technique that's used to organize these types of color revolutions is they create a color that people can give their identities into, and that transplants or replaces their personal tendency to think for themselves, because now you're part of a tribe. The tribe has a symbol or a color or both that could then unify the mob and then have it directed by those who control the levers of the hypnotic symbols. And, then people find themselves marching for whatever. There's corruption in my government. I don't like it. I'm going to go to this controlled march. And 90% of the people just simply want to express their frustration.
Mm-hmm.
But then what you have are these provocateurs who are deployed. They're paid a little bit extra money, and they're deployed to throw a Molotov cocktail. They're sent into the crowd, and then these guys start getting violent. Let's say they start hitting police with some steel batons. A few of the ignorant, useful idiots in the crowds who are not provocateurs get emotionally into it some of the time, and all of a sudden the mob can start losing itself into violence. Oftentimes, it's just the provocateurs who start making a mess, and that's what was done also in Ukraine. So after the Georgian elected government was sufficiently overthrown by Saakashvili, that model was applied in 2004 to the government of Ukraine, and that was called the Orange Revolution. And a U.S. puppet regime was installed at that time, which began to declare weird things. Like, not only did they start making appeals to get into NATO for the first time, which was never an ambition for Ukraine ever, but all of a sudden the new government that was put in power by the CIA all of a sudden really wanted to get into NATO, just as Saakashvili wanted to get into NATO in Georgia, as well as into the European Union, the European thing that was created with the Maastricht Treaty in 92. They wanted all of a sudden to be part of the Eurozone. And they started also celebrating, like labeling Stefan Bandera, again, the collaborator, the fascist, hard Nazi collaborator. It's true, he went in prison at a certain point because he wanted his own independent fascist, pro-eugenics Ukrainian state. And Hitler was like, no, you have to be a second junior party. You can't be your own thing. He didn't want that, so he got put in prison. That doesn't stop him from being a rabidly genocidalist pro-fascist. That doesn't change that fact. But he became a national hero officially by the new Ukrainian government. Streets were named after him, and a variety of these collaborators were all of a sudden made national heroes. And these parties that were fringe and that began really growing in the 90s really took to all of a sudden find themselves in positions of political influence. Andrei Perubi, who became the head of Pravi Sector, or Right Sector as it has come to be known, which oversees hundreds of youth indoctrination facilities, little militarization of youth camps all over Ukraine. Again, a lot of it is bankrolled by fronts tied to the CIA, became a deputy minister. And a variety of these things happened. Now, there was a surprise in 2009, when Yanukovich, a capitalist sort of Trump figure, he was he had some ties to mafia, organized crime, but he was all about looking for business, and he recognized that Ukraine was being used as a proxy by Western military powers who wanted to provoke conflict with Russia, and he knew that this was not good business for Ukraine, and he started making inroads and created a lot of back-channel discussions with his Russian counterparts to find a way to break Ukraine out of this impossible situation. He also saw that there was a smell of things to come when he looked down to Georgia to the south and saw that the Georgian Prime Minister Saakashvili had launched a war with Russia when he was given a certain promise by Dick Cheney at the time. This is 2008, that if you attack South Ossetia, sort of a pro-Russian or Russian protectorate within Georgia, if you would start attacking them, there's soldiers that have been stationed there for decades, then the U.S. and NATO will back you up and will accelerate your entry into NATO. Now, that didn't actually happen. Not too sure why, but after 5 days, Russia went in, cleaned up. Saakashvili had to escape. He basically had a lot of criminal charges, a lot of corruption charges, and he basically escaped to the United States, where he was given sanctuary for a number of years. And Yanukovych didn't want that fate for Ukraine, so he started. He announced basically that Russia was offering to help rehabilitate the Ukrainian economy. Unlike Europe, which only wanted cheap raw materials and agricultural raw materials from Ukraine, which is not a good way to grow an economy. If you also need to have industrial, scientific productions if you want to really have a strong economy. Russia was willing to do that, and Russia said, "Hey, we'll help stimulate your factories again. We will purchase finished goods from Ukraine, and we won't stop you from also doing a deal with Europe at the same time." The Europeans, however, said, "No, if you want to join the European Union, then the European Ukraine free trade deal is exclusive. You cannot have any type of parallel contracts with Russia. It's us or nothing." So Yanukovych was doing what he could. He also canceled Stefan Bandera. He basically removed Bandera as a hero of Ukraine. It pissed off a lot of the Nazis. But things were starting to get better economically. He still had the support of the mass base of the people. Ukraine, keep in mind as well, is a very schismed, like the entirety of the East, Donetsk and Crimea is majority of primarily Russian speakers. 80 or more percent of the population of the East speaks Russian as their first language. It's really their family is in Russia. It's not. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, to interject here, just for people who might not know it, I think it was you who mentioned this, but or someone on a podcast, is that it was kind of, while Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, it didn't really matter the boundaries, but Khrushchev sort of arbitrarily redrew Ukraine at one point, and he was from that region, and all these Russian-speaking people just kind of got lopped in there. And when the Soviet Union broke up, they really had more affinity with their Russian heritage. And so I know they even did a referendum a number of years back and wanted to rejoin Russia. So that's just something of, that's why there is this big Russian bloc there.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the thing, right? So Ukraine, since we're going down this angle, Ukraine and Russia have a certain deep historical bond. They both originate from Kiev and Rus. Both of them have the Rurik dynasty. Volodymyr the Great, who was a great grandson of Rurik, was the guy who Christianized Russia. He was, at the time, it was Kiev and Rus. And Russia grew over the years. After the Ruriks, you had the Tsar system set up in the 16th or late 15th century, early 16th century, I think. And then the territory that we today call Russia slowly began to grow, but it was very small back then. And it sort of originated in that Kiev and Rus zone. Now, originally, the Ruriks were Vikings. They were pagan Vikings. So Rurik was a pagan Viking, not a Slav. And so when the Vikings came in, the Varangians came in the 9th century, they began what was known as the Slav trade. They started utilizing the people who had been living there and creating, and basically they took control and used these people as commodities. Rurik, I don't know. I mean, I maybe he was a complex character. I don't know enough. I just know that was like why they call it slaves, is it comes directly from the Slavs. Rurik's great grandkid, Volodymyr, seems to have pissed off some of the elites of the pagan Viking dynastic systems that didn't like the fact that he converted to Christianity, but he did. And that sort of changed the contour of the political philosophy, the idea of natural law, the idea of everything of what became Russia. There were still a ton of problems, but it made it a little bit more manageable. The pagan system it was tied to mystery cults, Odin worshiping stuff. Sacrifice of humans was a part of the ritual of just maintaining these religions.
Christianity set them on sort of this progressive, this better path for many.
Yeah, you don't do that. It's very explicit in the Old Testament that you don't do human sacrifice. You don't kill. You don't sacrifice the Moloch or Baal. You don't do that. And in the New Testament, it's even more explicit that you don't even do animals. You don't need to. Christ, the concept is that Jesus was the last needed sacrifice. We don't have to do that. Now we have to just focus on being loving, good people, walking in the footsteps of Jesus as a role model, which is very difficult to do, to love your neighbor, love yourself. in a higher way, act accordingly. It's really difficult to do, very politically disruptive if you have people with that mindset. And so anyway, I say this because the Ukrainian Nazi movement, just like the original Nazi movement in Russia, the original Nazi movement in Germany, was based upon a pagan revivalism, an Odin worshipping idea of restoring the pure pagan Germanic folk spirit. And there's different variations of these myths for the Finnish. There were the Finnish fascists, the Swedish fascists, even the Russian fascists. There was a big Russian fascist party in the 1940s that were collaborating very closely with the Nazis. They didn't see them, and people might say, oh, well, how is that possible? Because the Russians were seen as subhuman Untermenschen in Mein Kampf. So you're like, how did they justify as Russians working with a grouping that saw them as genetically inferior, as Hitler did see the Russians and the Slavs, and that's why Hitler believed that Russia's entire purpose would be to be depopulated and to serve as a slave labor camp for the heartland, for the Lebensraum that would grow, right? Well, it's
once you finish that thought,
yeah.
I have a question from our audience.
The answer for that is that the Russian fascists didn't see themselves as Slav. They situated their identity in the purity of the Rurik pre-Christian blood. And so they despised the Slavs, as those Vikings that took control of Russia did at those times. They despised Christianity. They saw Christianity maybe only useful as an outward tool of control, as Hitler did when he made his Reichsbible and rewrote a big chunk of the Bible, took out "Thou shalt not kill," removed it, and introduced things like you should honor your Führer as within the Bible. So that was they like that type of idea of Christianity as a tool of control for dumb people, but they actually, the elites of the SS around Heinrich Himmler and the leading Thule Society occultists didn't actually believe at all in Christianity. They were into what exactly it has been revived with this anti-Russian, anti-Slavic movement of pro-Nazis glorifying Bandera and Mykola Lebed today.
I mean, Matthew has such deep knowledge, and I know we wanted to touch on Iran a little bit, but since we haven't got even up to Title League 2010 yet, but this is all fascinating, so it doesn't have to go in a certain way.
It's fine. We're just having fun.
This is a big question people have, because there's a lot of political tension internationally. And a lot of people are waking up, it's a bit of a uniparty. And then, wow, it's a lot of a uniparty. It's, two birds of the same side, whether you're in Britain or Canada. And even Trump got rid of a lot of that sort of deep state rhino part of his own party. But people are wondering, it's coming out like, that in the wars, there's the Nazis and the communists. And they're like, well, we fought with the communists against the Nazis, but it seems the communists were actually bad themselves. So that version of the Bolsheviks that took over Russia and they promoted atheism was kind of, would you say it was like a form of Nazism? Because until Russia really reclaimed their Christian heritage, and they've kind of grown and prospered, and you see pictures of how wonderful their lives are, and they're healthy and everything, like all these beautiful fruits are coming since they've reclaimed and embraced their Christian heritage. But can you just quickly, not too much time, but quickly clarify this whole myth that, something like Patton said he fought for the wrong side and should have fought against the communists. A lot of people are wondering, so that these elements of both sides were actually quite bad. And could it be that they, the globalists have always controlled both sides in that scenario, since you bring up these two divergent groups?
This is not, I can definitely talk about this. However, how much time do you got?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
I don't mind. I like
sum it up in less than 5. Yeah. Just this is such a deep dive. Anyways, I mean, it's one of these confusing things for people about.
Yeah, it's messy. It's messy, but it's intelligible.
Both sides are controlled, aren't they? The globalists have gone back. They've been playing both sides.
For this one, it's yes and no. Like, in the sense that there's nuance, and it's often this whole topic that you're bringing up is often painfully oversimplified to give simple, overly simplistic answers that destroy the mind of anyone silly enough to accept those conditions of simplicity. It destroys their ability to understand what actually happened and what the fight's about. Because there are controlled oppositions, and in fact, it's true that you can find the origins of modern fascism and the origins of modern of a certain type, specifically of communism, in the same root. And I would say that root has a lot to do with the Fabian socialists, or the social imperialists of the 19th century, that had promoted the writings and the works of Friedrich Engels. The handler, this is a German, but a Manchester businessman who was, and no one can really differentiate what are Marx's writings versus Engels' writings, but it seems like Engels was sort of like the Thomas Huxley to Marx's Darwin. You know, if you want to say it that way, he was the sort of a manager of Marx. Marx spent all of his time writing and studying in the British Museum. He had a handler named David Urquhart as well, a high-level British intelligence operative at the British Museum, who was managing Marx's development of his Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital in 1848. The First International, and this also includes people like Engels, was part of several key salons of high-level British imperial controllers. Number one is John Ruskin, who ran what's known as the working men's university, the working men's colleges, to sort of start training the poor and the working class, to give them access to some type of education, but that education would be based upon certain theories that would make their minds more malleable and useful to anyone who would wish to weaponize mass group behavior, kind of like groupthink. This is where the
Jacobins type thing in France.
Yeah, like they were studying the techniques of how the Jacobins of France were able to be rallied and utilized to destroy France as a viable government, where everybody got their heads cut off. And the Jacobin movement was something that was it was sort of the first time that I think a color revolution type of manipulation occurred that way, managed by British Freemasonic outfits with deep state operations inside of France, that undermined the ability for France to actually become a sovereign republic, the way many leaders who got their heads cut off, who had been working with Ben Franklin, had suffered. And this got tweaked over the ensuing decades after Napoleon was put down as a proto-fascist himself. You had a wave of new revolutionary activity. 1830 was a big wave of revolutionary activity across Europe and France. And then a big one, the biggest one, was 1848, the same year that the Communist Manifesto was being published, was the same year that you had Germany, Prussia, France, all of these proletariat uprisings, sort of precursors to what became the Bolshevik Revolution, began. And those who were managing that had a lot to do with British intelligence. They had a lot to do with a figure named Giuseppe Mazzini, who was an Italian Grandmaster Freemason from the Memphis and Mizraim, or the Memphis Lodge, an Egyptian rite, that worked very closely with Lord Palmerston at the time. And he also the growth of the modern mafia system in America actually was overseen, and that grew under Giuseppe Mazzini's cultivation. I say all of it. He was a Luciferian, very big Satanist, and he controlled things like Garibaldi. Anyway, I'm saying that was another military figure who did a lot of damage. But anyway, and Marx and Engels specifically was part of the Ruskin salons. Ruskin was a guy who inspired Cecil Rhodes. He lectured at Oxford. He was an organizer of what became the First International. This is sort of the first communist international. The Second International, there was a fight between Bakunin, who was a mystic, Gnostic, I would say even Satanist, who promoted a certain type of reading of what communism would be, based upon what was a controlled opposition to Marx. Marx wanted a state-run, top-down thing. Bakunin, a Russian guy, was saying, no, I want it must be bottom up, basically anarcho syndicalism, little anarchistic communes will mystically form and create order somehow. Now, he was working closely with a guy named Prince Kropotkin, who was an heir of the Rurik dynasty. Kropotkin was also a major anarchist and ran these occult communes. He was close actually to many theosophists like Blavatsky. Madame Blavatsky was the originator of theosophy as a sect, and the popularization of the swastika was popularized first by Blavatsky in her Isis Unveiled in 1878, and a lot of the theosophical material that was being published was all based upon a revivalism of pagan mysticism and the mystery cults of ancient times. That's what Blavatsky was doing. So that's where a certain approach to blending Eastern and Western mysticism into a new syncretic religious order had a political aspect to it. And the political manifestation of that, including the idea of the Aryan super race, the Hyperborean Homo erectus races, all of this stuff came from Madame Blavatsky, from British imperialists around Ruskin, especially Bulwer-Lytton, and these neo-Darwinists as well. So Blavatsky was also promoting a neo-Darwinian eugenics as well, with a mystical vibe that were all adopted by Adolf Hitler, and these became the core psychological or cosmological belief structures that underpinned the growth of the Nazi and broader fascist movements after World War I. Which all, so that's important to have that in mind, and the tying in with communism is important, because it's true.
And with Ukraine, because they really adopted this really sick ideology in a big way, and unfortunately,
yes,
and for quite some time, it's like some of the ideologies here in the West that some of us can now see are very harmful. The people who are in them can't see these, the climate agenda and all these the green fanaticism, the gender ideologies. So so if we make a comparison, people who are in that, they think it's good. They're not bad people per se, but the fruits are so harmful, and from a top down, they're being done deliberately, perpetrated on the people. But they become indoctrinated with these ways of thinking and these belief systems. So now we have, if I could bring us up a little bit more to current.
Wait. I just realized that I left something just hanging, which was okay. So the Bolsheviks were indeed a color revolution funded by Wall Street and London bankers, Warburgs, Jacob Schiff. That's true. There's a pretty good book by Anthony Sutton, Going Through Wall Street, the Bolshevik Revolution. It's a decent book. Proves the case pretty well. However, it wasn't one thing. You had the Mensheviks. You had several different groupings within the Bolsheviks that had very different ideas of how to read, how to interpret what they were encountering within the writings of Marx. So there was this general consensus that they weren't going with Bakunin, they were going with Marx. And this is where things get a little bit more, like I said, nuanced, because some of them did absolutely want something that smelled and looked a lot like fascism. That's true. However, as soon as they took power, one of the first things that they did was mass privatization of everything under Trotsky. So Trotsky was sort of the golden boy. He was the one negotiating all of the money from Wall Street in London, or Wall Street. He was actually detained at a Nova Scotia port for being a spy for a month, when he had tons of money coming out after he went to Wall Street, to New York, and was on his way back to Russia in 1917. So anyway, he's the moneybags guy, and they wanted Trotsky to be the guy, the sort of emperor of Russia, the king of the Bolsheviks. They always
want to destroy Russia, right? When you say, I'm trying to put things in simple terms, this stuff is obvious to you, but these globalists have been at it for hundreds of years. They wanted to buy up Russia and just make it serfs. So when you say they were privatizing, some people says, oh, that sounds good, but it wasn't. And it came along with a lot of people murdered. Some people say 30, 40, 60 million
so this
people
is where
murdered.
Russia came out. The Bolsheviks, when they took power, they had very little political control in some sense, because they didn't have any control of the government. They were largely bankrupt. the solution came about through Trotsky specifically, who hit through his contacts and handlers, said, okay, the solution is privatize everything. It's called the New Economy Policy. And it'll be run, we'll bring in Armand Hammer, who was the head of Occidental Petroleum. He became also known as Lenin's banker. And he oversaw the mass, again, what kind of exactly what happened to Russia and Ukraine in the 1990s. That's what was already done to Russia in the 1920s, the New Economy Policy. And in fact, that's why George Bush Sr. called the privatization program of Russia in 1991 that he set up Operation Hammer, because it was based on the name of Armand Hammer, who was the first guy who oversaw, the New Economy Policy in the 20s. And the idea was,
under Glasnost and Perestroika, which ended up causing people to just starve, literally starve.
Yes. And it's kind of similar to what happened back then too. And it was Knives Out. So there were different factions battling. Trotsky gets kicked out. Keep that in mind.
He
right?
was a bad guy, right? For his story.
I'm at this point pretty confident that he was a Satanist. He was all of the fact in my mind that all of the core Trotskyists, the leading Trotskyists, including his personal assistant James Burnham, became the founding fathers of the neoconservative movement in 1940 is not a coincidence. That the neoconservative movement is the vitriolic sort of satanic infusion of a virus into the Republican Party that transformed its character during the Cold War, under both, again, Trotskyists. I'm here talking about Irving Kristol, James Burnham, Albert Volstetter, who ran Rand Corporation. It's all Paul Wolfowitz. All of these creatures who oversaw the Trilateral Commission, the weaponization of Islam in the 1970s, who took control of the U.S. government in the year 2000 and did 9/11. Those things all came out of the Trotskyists and the Straussians. Strauss was also a friend of Hitler's crown jurist, Carl Schmitt, who justified the Enabling Acts, the inside job that was the Reichstag fire in Nazi Germany. And Strauss was brought into the University of Chicago and started training a whole generation of manipulators in America. So again, I look at Trotsky, the fact that he got kicked out in 1927. It seemed like the nationalists, who had a much better sense of what was in the true self-interest of Russia, rallied at the time around the figure of Stalin, who had a better sense of the traitors and started taking down a lot of these Trotskyist fifth columnists inside of Russia, which began in the 20s, even late 20s, as soon as they kicked out Trotsky. Now, Trotsky was also working with the Nazis, and there's a guy named...
here they are. See, they play both sides. I mean...
Yeah.
So when did and then we'll get back to sort of more current times, but when was this sort of resurgence of Christianity in Russia? So when did they kind of reclaim?
Well, it never really went away. It was sort of just ignored. There was like in different parts when you had Trotsky in place, there was, and the Cheka, there was massive crackdowns on religion. Some of these were people who really took the parts of Karl Marx that called the religion the opiate of the masses really seriously. Other ones were just like, no, we can't do that. Like, let's just take because that's what I'm saying. When you have people reading Marx, what I've discovered is that they're often very like picky choosy, and there's so much stuff in Marx, like, you know, that you'd be like, okay, well, if you're trying to solve a problem, his emphasis upon the need to increase industrial powers of labor, the productive powers of labor, that's fine. It's like, yeah, if you don't want to, the fact that Marx refuted Malthus, he didn't like Malthus because Malthus said, no, we always have to adapt to scarcity. Overpopulation is always the crisis. Marx, in his writings, said, no, we can always increase new discoveries and have more production that will erase your argument. So if you're a problem solver and you don't know about anything else, you might latch onto that. And then the parts of Marx that say, oh yeah, we got to abolish private property or we got to abolish religion, you might just say, I'd rather just ignore that and keep what's useful. And that's what I think was the case with Russia, is that it never went away. There were points in the 1920s where there was a bad clampdown. Stalin, by the early 1930s, declared it illegal. Like, he shut down all of the Marxist, the Freemasonic agencies in Russia. He made it illegal to have these Freemasonic networks. He just shut them down. And he, under Roosevelt's influence, especially in with Roosevelt giving his support to Russia, in the lead up to World War II, Stalin basically started supporting the reconstruction and growth of the churches again, so people could come out of the closet, once again. So it was under Stalin that the churches became okay again.
Okay, great. Oh, thank you. I mean, there's just so many questions people have. So now we're fast tracking just to get and then we do want to spend just a few minutes on Iran. I don't know if you could stay an extra 15 minutes. I mean, now
it's fine.
Almost a full hour, or we're 50 minutes. Let's say we started a bit late.
We'll just follow the idea, whatever you want to take it.
Okay. So let's sort of round out on this sort of Israel-Russia thing, and then we'll do like a short. I know you've got some things you want to show the audience, so we'll just kind of get a sense, because these are the two really big geopolitical conflicts that they're trying to push. And obviously, one of the reasons I'm involved politically is I think we don't benefit from war. We benefit from peace. I want to be a political leader that is promoting peace and inspiring peace. And you can see how they take away economic hope from people, and that makes the masses upset. And then they try to push them into some sort of violent thing. Over history, it's the same playbook. So, I mean, one of the things I really liked about Trump, many of the things he did, his fruits, for whatever people call him, is he really fueled economic growth. He gave that powerhouse back to the people, innovation, with its protective tariffs as well, rebuilt the economy. And that's something we can do in Canada because we have a very rich country. And as you've talked about too, all these Western nations have been turned into consumer societies and deindustrialized, specifically and on purpose by this same sort of oligarchical, kind of empire, because they don't want people to be sovereign and independent and, all of these things prosperous, either healthy, as we know. So let's just go back to some of the trigger points for what's happening today. I know I interviewed your lovely wife, and we talked a little bit about, was it the Minsk agreement that they totally agreed? They had agreement, and Russia signed it that they would never join NATO, and they just disregarded that. And so here we are. This is an existential risk. I know even Robert Kennedy Jr. explained it really well. So now they're poking the bear over and over again. I don't know how many people have been needlessly slaughtered. When's it going to end? And what could be done?
You're totally right. So this is after the Maidan coup that began in November of 2013, and it was finalized in February of 2024. This was something that involved Georgian snipers that were brought in by the CIA via Georgia to be sat on a certain building and who shot at both sides into the crowds and into the police, resulting in I think 98 police officers killed, a similar number of protesters, many dozens were killed, but they weren't killed by each other. They were killed by these mercenaries who were brought in to stoke the fires of violence. And that's sort of resulted in ultimately the overthrow of the elected government of Yanukovich. He had to escape. Now that what coincided with that, as you alluded to, was an immediate push to Ukrainianize, to rewrite the history of Ukraine, rewrite especially World War II, painting, of course, the idea as these Banderites would like people to believe that World War II was really about stopping or fighting Russia. In fact, the only people who were fighting Russia were the Nazis and Nazi collaborators. But that was Stalin becomes the bad guy, Hitler becomes the not so bad guy in their revisionism, and Ukraine becomes the language for schools, bureaucracy, and basically there's a push to illegalize the use of the Russian language, which had been the historic language used, for much of Russia, much of Ukraine forever. And so you had an immediate push. Things were getting really violent. I think in Odessa, which is where Saakashvili actually was brought back from the United States and was made the governor of Odessa. You had a burning alive of 50 labor union workers who were fighting against the Nazis, who were striking, and they were all herded into a labor union building, lit on fire, killed completely killed, and Saakashvili was the guy assigned to cover that up. Crimea could see that what was done in Odessa was about to come to Crimea. They carried out an emergency referendum. It was overwhelmingly in support of joining back to Russia, which, as you pointed out, was historically the case. And it was Khrushchev who, for whatever reason, just gave it over to Ukraine. Didn't have a good reason in the 50s, but he did it. So basically, they went back. It's again over 80% first language Russian. They identify as Russian culture Russian. They have it's a Russian identity there, kind of like Quebec. Imagine all of a sudden Ottawa legalizing the use of the French language. What's Quebec going to do? They're going to go for a referendum and have independence. That's what they would do. So it's kind of very similar as what was done there. And an immediate civil war was launched from 2014. It's now known that over 14,000 civilians were killed in Donetsk by shelling.
Russian, indigenous Russian, or both.
Well, I think these are people who identify perhaps with Russian, but they were civilians who just lived in the Donbass region. And that was unbearable. But there were efforts, like you pointed out, in Minsk 1, Minsk 2, there were these efforts to create a peace negotiation, and all Russia wanted, and that was agreed upon, and it was overseen by people like Hollande and Angela Merkel, which was some form of written guarantees that Ukraine would not join NATO, because NATO is recognized correctly as an existential threat for Russia, and NATO has grown from 15 countries in 1995 to today it's 31, and every country that gets into NATO all of a sudden loses their sovereignty and gets anti-Russian missiles installed as part of the full spectrum dominance missile shield. That's the case for Romania, for Poland, for everybody. So Russia said, okay, we need a buffer, just like the case before World War II. Russia just wanted a buffer, some guarantee that there would not be a direct way for at the time it was the Nazis to go and attack Russia. That became Operation Barbarossa. That's what Russia's thinking about again today. But now there's nuclear weapons. So as was discussed, it was generally agreed upon. The things were signed. And the guarantee that you'll respect the Russian language for the people who live there and speak Russian. You'll respect the Crimean referendum, but otherwise Russia doesn't want any more territory. It was very clear they just want security guarantees. That wasn't given. And as Merkel and Hollande both admitted recently, they actually said that they never intended to honor the Minsk 1 or 2 agreements, and that they were just doing it to buy time so that Ukraine could militarize in preparation for an inevitable war on behalf of their Western patrons. And they admitted that in words, and people can go and listen to Hollande and to Merkel say explicitly just that very thing. So it meant nothing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible overview. And for people who don't remember, and Matthew had taught us and in his books, the Russians came to Lincoln's rescue during the Civil War, and they brought their ships to exert their power to fight against, fight against slavery and fight for the Republic, recognizing how important it was that America was remained its Republican roots and did not become infested with the same imperialism that they were aware of already. So yeah, it's very interesting. History it is what the past you can learn from. I mean, we're in precarious times. So take us now. So hopefully cooler heads will prevail. And I know Trump has offered to step in. He is recognized on the world stage, for peacekeeping. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be very choppy. So just take us a little bit over. I know you have some things you want to bring up. Just the other potential real conflict right now. There's the whole Middle East conflict, very sad. And I know there was the Abraham Accords. It's all fallen apart again. And now they're bringing Iran into the picture again. Can you discuss sort of the implications about this just a little bit? And a lot of people don't know much about Iran. I lived in Germany for a year, and I met the most wonderful people who had fled to Iran at that time in the 90s. And, I ended up becoming very good friends with them, and very, really nice people. And there's a lot that I learned about their culture that's different from the way the media portrays it, but just great people. So yeah, take us over to there now.
Okay. Well, I guess I won't do the historic thing right away. If we want to do that afterwards, we can. But what you can do, you have to do so I have a slideshow. I've got two slideshows.
Oh,
One of them is next to my face at the bottom. Where if you could do a show, yeah, that one right there.
that one. Okay.
Yeah. So it's important. So geopolitically, the factor of Iran is extremely important for a number of reasons. Number one, it has recently joined the Belt and Road, the BRICS. So it's part of the BRICS alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which was set up in 2000. Well, South Africa joined in 2011. That has grown to 10 countries. Iran, Saudi Arabia is not a member yet. They haven't finalized their membership, but it seems like it's going to happen. But Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, UAE have all joined. Unfortunately, Argentina under Malay said they're not going to join, and they ended up enmeshing themselves back into the US dollar and doing sort of a perestroika for Argentina, which is currently underway. Mass privatizations, cuts of social services and everything. It's only benefiting the multinational corporations. It's not actually benefiting the Argentinians. And so that was a mistake. But anyway, Iran is part of that. In 2019, they were made a full member, or no, it was 2020. They were made a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, another very important multilateral organization with Russia, India, China as the backbone, but that now has Iran, Pakistan. There's a number of nations who have joined in a very big waiting list to be a part of that. That's a little bit more of like a counterpole to NATO. So they all work together. It has a bit more of an economic orientation than NATO does. The BRICS, very much economic oriented as well as cultural. And Iran has signed major deals with China. It was a $450 billion 20-year trade deal based on energy and security cooperation, as well as a big investment of China into Iranian transport infrastructure. Russia, $20 billion investment into Iran as part of a Russia-Iran trade deal that was just finalized. That involves also security, military cooperation as well. They've been doing joint military exercises with South Africa. And more recently, Iran and Saudi Arabia, those two historic nemeses, have actually had their wounds healed. They've rebuilt diplomatic bridges, rebuilt their embassies in each other's countries,
Wow.
and have now done joint military exercises just a couple of weeks ago together as a direct message to the West that the whole Sunni-Shia conflict that's been artificially manufactured is not going to fly anymore.
Good.
So that's good. That's very good.
That's very positive. Yes.
Yeah. Egypt has also been playing a role in that. Now, geopolitically, one of the things to keep in mind is that what they're moving towards, and this is a slideshow I made for a conference held in Greece. So I'll just go through a couple of the slides. There's something called the International Transportation Corridor, the International North-South Transportation Corridor that involves Russia and Iran and India as the primary backbone, but it also involves Georgia and a few other countries. So actually, yeah, let me, currently the big control of the game board is through shipping and sea lanes. So who controls the ports, just like in the days of the British Empire, who controls the ports controls the world. The idea of overland development has been really sabotaged, as we've seen the rail lines in Canada being destroyed over 70, 80 years. It really got bad in the 50s, but it really, really got bad in the 70s and 80s. And we've had now just a destruction of our rail systems that were the basis of building cities in the 50s and the 40s. Rail is more than just a rail. So it's the means by which a country can become integrated with itself and to be able to grow industries, to access resources that otherwise are inaccessible. Very important idea. So currently, these are some of the major trade routes that are very much blocked. The Straits of Malacca is a big one as far as goods coming in from Shanghai. It takes about 40 days for goods or oil moving to and from China through the Straits of Malacca, which has about 38% of the world commodities traveling through that zone. And the Suez Canal through the Red Sea over here, below Yemen and Saudi Arabia, that's the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That's a hugely important, but again, over bloated, very blocked shipping zone. So there's that factor. Also keep in mind the BRICS together now as 9 countries represent 39% of the world GDP. The G7 countries, the so-called first world developed countries, represent a GDP collectively that's I think 26% or something, far less than the BRICS countries. So also very important to keep that in mind. But they're thinking about how are they going to deal with these. You can't grow if you stick with these clogged up shipping straits. Here's another view of just some of these core choke points. So what is the International North-South Transportation Corridor, which again, Iran plays a key role as a pillar in this. And it was an agreement reached in the year 2000 between Russia, India, and Iran. It's a 7,200 kilometer, what's called multimodal mega project. It involves integrating several Eurasian nations directly or indirectly. There's up to 17 actually nations that have been involved with this. With rail, roads, and shipping corridors into a united and tight-knit web of interdependency and cooperation. It goes right down through the Caspian Sea with ports as well along the Caspian Sea and shipping routes, as well as on the west side and east side of the Caspian through Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, and on the other west side around Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. So it says here that, or I made this little slide that made the point that there's energy, mining, high-tech special economic zones. The Caspian is an oil and natural gas behemoth. There is so much underdeveloped oil and natural gas in and around the Caspian. It's mind-blowing. Co-signers of the International North-South Transportation Corridor include Armenia, Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Oman, Syria, and even Ukraine, though Ukraine may not be a very reliable partner in this. I don't know.
Right.
This is a recent image of it as it's expanded to not just be based on Moscow, but all the way up to St. Petersburg. And there's you see the red line would be the red and yellow lines would be railways. The red would be the north-south transportation corridor. The east-west yellow corridor is one of several branches of the Belt and Road Initiative. Again, you can see Iran and Tehran specifically as the capital is the key, with 2 ports on the south of Iran, the Chabahar port and Bandar Abbas, which would take goods to and from India, which has the port of Mumbai right over there. Right, and then there's a similar project that Modi has embarked on for rail integration in India, which is a big reason why India has been breaking free of its colonial enslavement, and they've been punished, they've been threatened, and a big reason I believe why Canada has severed diplomatic ties with India has a lot to do with the fact that India is not towing the Anglo imperial line any longer, and so they're being falsely accused. Modi's being accused of
Yes.
killing Sikh separatists in Vancouver. Of course, when you ask, well, what evidence do they have? CSIS never shows evidence. It's all classified for national security. So, of course, you can say whatever you want. But it's justifying kicking out ambassadors, shutting off trade and diplomatic ties because India is looking out for itself for once.
Mm-hmm.
That's another aspect of the trade routes from a different diagram. And it coincides with like I mentioned, the Belt and Road, or otherwise the Silk Road Initiative, this is one of the major arteries from China into Europe that would facilitate trade. It would cut off something like 10 days of travel of goods and people. You could see
this is all developed, right? This is already laid out. This isn't like a futuristic plan.
No. This is already the big artery is already done. Trains are already going from Rotterdam. They've already been going for several years from Rotterdam all the way to Xi'an. There are other arteries that are being built in piecemeal form in the northern route going from Mongolia down that connects into the Trans-Siberian that's being upgraded and all the way up into Europe via Russia. But I don't know. I mean, a lot of technocrats want to cut Russia off as they build a new Iron Curtain. So that may be sabotaged. The other one would be the southern branch. I don't know if I have an image of it or if I don't. Let me go see. Yes. The southern branch of the Silk Road, which is being built. Actually, this is built. This is done.
This is done.
The China-Iran rail route that goes through Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan into China. And it stops at Tehran, which there's a current maneuver to build a rail down from Tehran to the south into the Shalamshe Basra railway into Iraq that could then connect to an existent 1,500 kilometer rail line in Iraq, and that could rehabilitate the Syrian economy as well. So that would be what's called the southern branch of the Silk Road that would then go into Europe, Turkey, and other ports. Another branch could feasibly go down through Jordan. Hopefully it could be the driver for economic rehabilitation of Palestine. And I don't know, that requires a miracle to enforce some peace process whereby some of this development can actually start benefiting the people living in Palestine and Israel. But that's there. It's there. And Egypt wants it as well. They're building up high-speed rail connecting the Red Sea into the Mediterranean. It's already built 1,000 kilometers in the last 2 years in Egypt, and varieties of routes going down from Egypt into Sudan. China and Saudi investments play a very big role here. This is another rail line from Pakistan into Iran and into Turkey, Ankara. That's a huge line that was rehabilitated in recent years. That's already there. Again, older technology, but still very important connecting service there. Another image of the north-south transportation corridor. And here's another version of it, which coincides. This is a little bit more of a grandiose vision that the Cradle magazine put together. I think the Schiller Institute originally designed it, based upon what Bashar al-Assad in 2004 began to organize for, and this is known as the 5 C's vision for Syria. Currently, Israel has invaded Syria, and there's a push right now to destabilize once more Syria and do what Obama failed to do, which was a Gaddafi murder operation utilizing ISIS proxies in Libya as part of an Arab regime change. That's what they're trying to do now. Even though Syria did avoid it in 2011, 2012, 2013, Russia saved them. They're doing it again. So there's a big push right now to blow up Syria as well as Iran. And so anyways, Bashar al-Assad in 2004 began organizing internationally for this. It's called the 5 C's vision because it connects the 5 major seas, the Caspian, Black Sea, Mediterranean, Persian Gulf, and Red Sea, in high-speed rail with little development hubs along the way, and Syria would be the center point of that would connect into Iraq, into Baghdad, as well as into Tehran. That fits beautifully into both the east-west Silk Road as well as north-south transportation corridor. It's very, very synergistic. So, yeah, very important. And just to say, the concept of this INSTC, the corridor, is driven by an appreciation for creating genuine long-term sustainable value by increasing productive forces, increasing the cognitive powers of the workforce, and thus increasing the influence of the noosphere. So that sort of the sphere of human mentation, where human creative thought shapes the atoms of the world. I'm not talking about the transhumanist noosphere, because the transhumanists are trying to use this for their own. Yeah,
no,
different idea.
Don't want that. Stay
different
human.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is finding points of cooperation versus competition in zero-sum games. So this is breaking out of zero-sum thinking and introducing something that's based on always making new discoveries, going outside of your limits to growth, and overcoming the Malthusian paradox that way. So that's what's happening now, and that's what they really want to destabilize, is all of that momentum for progress and peace. Which is why Iran and Syria have big targets on their foreheads right now, as does Russia and China.
It's something that's come up, and I don't claim to have a lot of knowledge in this area. Just limited reading on the land of the law. Law of the land versus the law of the sea, and a lot of the sort of the oligarchs and the deep state influences over the hundreds and hundreds of years in the past. They use the dominance of the sea to subject the people. And then now it's a big threat to them building railway. I mean, I was in Japan with my children over the summer. That's where they wanted to go, but their high-speed rail, and it's just incredible. Mm-hmm. And like, it's so efficient. It made me wonder what's happened in Canada. We got these outdated kind of like, old rail, and we haven't even got it, across Canada, let alone up through the north. I mean, you could tell there's been a deliberate, setting us back. And having railway, if we could get it all throughout North America as well, would be a really huge advantage. for all of us. So
Absolutely.
it's a big game changer. Now, the whole legal part, I have to save that for another day. But let me ask you a cultural question, because a lot of us, I'm a woman, strong woman. You see the pictures of all of these these Muslim countries where women used to have these most beautiful dress, and they would wear makeup. They were stunning. And then all of a sudden, Islam became radicalized, and they're wearing these burqas and hijabs. And you hear about protests now in Iran. What's the situation like now? Do women have the ability to dress just like I would, or are there still some sort of restrictions? Is it something that they willingly want now? Is it something they've kind of adopted? What's it like in Iran today? Because a lot of people wonder. I have great friends from Iran, and some Canadians have come over, second, third generation. What's the situation in Iran for people?
Well, from what I gather, I mean, it's something which is not as bad from my take. It's not as bad as we're being given by the horror stories projected in our mainstream media that wants us to have a very specific anti-human idea of like Iranians as these barbarians, and they're a threat to world peace and to Israel. We're given a lot of propaganda. I've noticed that if you are a television personality, you got to wear kind of the big hijab zone. Like it's kind of uncomfortable to watch like female television personalities of Iran, just because they're wearing a lot of clothing, right? The whole and if you are a member of parliament, if you're working in the Iranian government, and there are a number of women who are parliamentarians, so they actually have political power, but they still are expected to wear like an uncomfortable amount of clothing. you see their face and their hands and stuff, but it's a little bit much. Day-to-day activity in the street, women don't have to do this. It's not like it's not like the case of the Taliban of the 80s or 90s, where the Taliban had like some weird hyper neurotic issue with women having like an inch of their skin showing. It's not like that. There's a lot of cases. You can see tons of videos, footage of women just dressing like any normal woman does, not skeezy, but like there's a very Western vibe to women in students walking down the street doing their shopping in Tehran. You see it. There's not like the horror stories. I haven't seen any evidence of actual like horror stories of like, you hear this case of this girl who got the hijab police who like took her to the police station, and they killed her because she didn't want to wear her hijab. And no, that turns out to be, there's a lot more to the story than that. The girl had some sort of a health issue already and collapsed. And then the Western spin doctors go to work. They start crafting a narrative, showing images out of context. And then all of a sudden you got people protesting all over London and France and Montreal over a non-existent issue. That's sort of what they do as far as the Edward Bernays, propaganda machinery. So it is unfortunate that when you look at Iran in the 70s and pictures of Tehran in the 70s, or even Afghanistan, or like it could be New York.
Now, was this like a CIA operation to radicalize Islam and then destroy all these countries? They literally bombed them, these beautiful countries, instead of allowing people to flourish and be independent. They promoted all of these inner conflicts. I mean, it's just such a tragedy going on for decades and decades.
That was part of, so the fact that these neocons who came in with Paul Nitz and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld in the 70s under the Carter administration, they were all members of the Trilateral Commission, and it was under Gerald Ford and Carter that they really got underway. And took control fully. And again, they were all former Trotskyists. Not a coincidence. Trotsky, one of the key aspects of his worldview was permanent war or permanent revolution. The only way to stop the lethargy and decadence of a people is to keep them in constant turmoil, to always be in revolution. Always.
Not good. Yeah.
Not a healthy mindset. That was the basis actually of his dispute with Lenin and Stalin. Lenin thought he was an idiot because he's like, no, it's you that's not viable. And Stalin was like, no, let's just try to figure out how to make this country work before you go and start calling for a world revolution. And so that was an unbridgeable divide, and that's why he got kicked out and his networks got taken down. But see, all of these guys became the neocons. They had their big coming out party, with the Trilateral Commission, and they oversaw with Paul Nitz, who was one of the orchestrators of the program to massively expand the U.S. military arsenal with NSC 68 and another one I forgot, the JCO. I forget. Anyway, the idea that the U.S. had to be at permanent war and even permit for preventative strikes against Russia back in the 50s. That was a Paul Nitz, Wolfowitz neocon idea. These guys came up with this idea of like doing the arc of crisis. So playing the Islamic card to try to suck in Russia into its own Vietnam as a wasting war. And they did that through a variety of techniques, but it began with fueling. At first it was $500 million under Operation Cyclone in 1978, which poured cash across Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, into radicalizing madrasas, sort of like Islamic schools for young men that would give a certain spin on the Quran that would emphasize jihad, a variety. This is known as a philosophy of Salafism that was innovated by an ally of Helena Blavatsky in the 1870s, Jamal Abdin al-Ghafani, who was the founder of Salafism and actually had worked with the British Empire in Afghanistan. He was Persian, but he passed himself off as an Afghani. And even though he was a Gnostic mystic and probably Satanist, Aleister Crowley loved his work, as did Blavatsky. They were traveling partners. Despite the fact that he didn't actually believe in Islam, he promoted and actually created and promoted a philosophy of interpretation of the Quran that generated several generations of hardcore Islamist fundamentalists. Right.
Oh, is that shifting now? Like this is you talk about the healing between the Sunnis.
Oh yeah. It's shifting. I'm
and
just
they're
saying
realizing they were played basically.
Yeah.
Like a lot of us were realizing we've all been played, and this historical context by this same sort of parasite at the top that wants us dead and not smart, never really figuring out the game, and always just putting our hands out for the few crumbs we can get. Sort of.
Oh yeah, no, it's getting better. It requires economic development, but the big inhibitor to this development, and this again has a lot to do with the fact that the West has been consciously, and I say the West very loosely here, but the Anglosphere, the heirs of the British Empire, have been consciously undermining authentic nationalist movements in the Arab world for a very long time, and when you had the case even in the 20th century, you had a nationalist named Mohammad Mossadegh, who became prime minister of Iran under the Shah, and he immediately fought hard to nationalize British petroleum interests. That somehow Britain had gotten control of Iranian petroleum interests in the 1870s. How the hell did they pull that off? But they did it. They did the same thing in Egypt too. They got control of all of Egypt's natural resources and then controlled the Suez Canal. Didn't let the Egyptians benefit at all. They just allowed for a small elite organized crime network in Egypt to be the stooges for the West, and they would get to stay in their palaces with their harems. Same thing for Iran. They like local stooges, local controllers. Afghanistan also, after the Anglo-Afghan wars of the 19th century, Britain came out fully controlling Afghanistan, turned it into a hub for opium production. So Britain's hands were their tentacles were everywhere. So when Mossadegh got power, he fought really, really heavy to nationalize these oil fields. And, the young guy, Reza Shah, was a young guy at the time. He was okay with that, but he's a very weak person. Reza Shah lived in his castle, or not a castle, but his palace, very detached from the people, not a bad guy, but confused. And he was, but he gave at a certain time Mossadegh support for what he was doing. And Mossadegh was overthrown by a CIA MI6 run coup overseen by Kermit Roosevelt, I think the nephew of Teddy Roosevelt, who organized mass protests calling Mossadegh a traitor to Islam and useful idiot men in Iran were brought to the streets. Some of them were given money by CIA front groups to go and demand the Shah be overthrown, and that gave a cover for certain paramilitary operations to actually do a takedown of the Shah and arrest and execute 6,000 of the Shah's leading soldiers of Iran were arrested. 600 of the best men were executed. The Shah was given the death sentence. Not the Shah, sorry. I said the Shah. I meant to say Mossadegh. Mossadegh was given the death sentence.
Was the president? Is that the title?
President? Yeah. Even though he was a hero by all intents and purposes, he was a lawyer and fought successfully in The Hague twice against the British Empire in 1951, defending Iran's rights to having nationalized British petroleum assets. And he won successfully, and his victories were used as a legal case in hundreds of other similar cases of poor countries that had been exploited in the ensuing years. But so they allowed him, they reduced his sentence, but they gave him basically imprisonment in his own house forever. He wasn't allowed to leave his house, speak, and then he died. And they wouldn't even allow his body to be buried. They buried it in the floorboards of the house because they were afraid that if they gave him a burial somewhere, that it would turn into a shrine and inspire the Iranians to fight imperialism, which they didn't want to allow. It's very disgusting. So that's what Eisenhower felt bad. I mean, the ball was put into motion under Truman, who authorized this, and John Foster and Allen Dulles. And then by the time Eisenhower got into power in 53, or he was inaugurated in 53 January, the machinery was already in motion, and he didn't really have the means to stop it. I don't think Eisenhower's a bad guy, but he was definitely weaker than JFK. And a similar thing happened, and so he tried to make amends a little bit for this by creating what's known as the Atoms for Peace, to basically say, okay, we're going to help Iran develop nuclear technology. They trained a generation of Iranian nuclear scientists. America under Eisenhower supplied Iran nuclear fuel. They helped them build their first nuclear reactor, a test reactor. And Eisenhower also put the stop on Israel, on Israel, Britain, and France, who wanted to overthrow Nasser, Gamal Nasser, who was nationalizing the Suez Canal. And he would have been killed had Eisenhower not put his foot down and said, no, we're not going to let this happen. What Nasser is doing is legitimate. And he pushed back, and that was good. So he made amends for his screw up. But a similar thing happened with Kennedy too, right? Like right as soon as Kennedy was elected, the ball was put into motion by John Foster Dulles to get the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba before JFK was even elected. So that by the time he stepped into the Oval Office, you had this machinery that was already had a high momentum to enmesh him into first a war of invasion of conquest of Cuba, and then a broader war against Russia, which is Joint Chiefs, Dulles.
Feels like sort of the same thing going on right now. They're rushing before Trump's inaugurated to get this Russia war really fueled up.
You got it. That's why I said these two case studies, exactly that. So it's the same model that they're using. And again, the radicalization of Islam that was used for the Arab Spring, sort of the Arab color revolution that were launched in 2010. That was a different variation of the thing that was done to Georgia and to Ukraine. They did a variation under CIA front groups utilizing radicalized Islamists, largely tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a British Freemasonic group that was set up in 1928 by followers of Jamal Abdin al-Afghani, who created this secret society with a paramilitary organization that allied itself with the Nazis in World War II under Haj Amin, who was formerly the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, under the British Mandate Palestine. So that guy Haj Amin was the Nazi collaborator trying to bring in as many Arabs into a pro-Nazi orientation. Now, in hindsight, I could say most Arabs said no to that. However, people today are told that the Arabs cooperated with the Nazis. That's actually not true. Haj Amin did, and his followers did, but they were all Muslim Brotherhood and not representative. They spent more of their time killing their fellow Muslims than they did killing Christians or Jews. So all that to say, that was the network that received the money, the bankrolling by the Zbigniew Brzezinski crowd in the 70s that toppled a more secular pro-Russian government and installed somebody in Afghanistan, Hektiar was his name, in Afghanistan, who was a narcotics, drug smuggling, corrupt bastard who was put in play. He ended up getting ousted, and then they brought in a bunch of Islamist Taliban that again fought the Russians. They made a movie, Rambo 3, celebrating the freedom-fighting Taliban with Sylvester Stallone fighting alongside the big bad Ruskies to working with the Taliban. Osama bin Laden cut his teeth in that domain, and the residues of it went latent when the Soviet Union collapsed, but it was still there, and that's what they amplified. Just like they amplified the Banderite Nazis in Ukraine, they amplified then, they brought back in the Islamist card for the Arab Spring and the toppling of Libya, and then first Tunisia, then Egypt, Mubarak, and on.
Gaddafi killed. Just a quick question.
When
here
was who?
Come up. Gaddafi. Can you just touch on? He was another one of those nationalist leaders who loved his people and was trying to build up the economy and all these wonderful things you hear he did for his people.
Yeah.
And then the West, all we hear is he was a bad guy. And when was that he was taken out?
October 20th, 2011. He was killed.
Okay.
And he was yeah, you're right. He was I didn't know much about him at the time, but in hindsight, looking at him, I see him now as a hero who fought against all odds to build the great man-made water project to green the deserts of the Sahara. He was trying to create a gold-backed dinar system outside of the control of the IMF, and he was working with Mubarak of Egypt as well as President Bashir of Sudan to create an alliance based on progress and development and cooperation. And he was also a major barrier to the growth of the Islamist, Al-Qaeda movement, which he was doing a pretty good job putting down. He had one of the biggest military arsenals, and so it was really important for Hillary Clinton to kill him, which she did, as well as her own ambassador, Christopher Stevens, who was trying to blow the whistle on the growth of these CIA-sponsored Islamist front groups in Libya, and also the transport of Libyan military equipment into Syria to arm the Free Syrian rebels that were largely, again, Al-Qaeda affiliates like Jabhat al-Nusra to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And he was blowing the whistle, and he had to be killed, which he was. He was silenced, and a movie was made about that, a crappy movie, as far as Hollywood propaganda is concerned. But that was overseen directly by Hillary and Obama and Jake Sullivan, who were the architects of this. Well, maybe not Jake Sullivan so much, but definitely Hillary. To what degree Biden was a part of it, I have no idea, but definitely Hillary really enjoyed that, even celebrated, we came, we saw, he died, chuckling, heckling like a little fanatic freak.
Have they been able to rebuild Libya? I mean, we don't hear about
them. No.
So
Libya is still not a governable state at this point. It's consciously been made ungovernable, and it was formerly the most affluent country of North Africa by a big margin. And, yeah.
Well, you see the examples here, but really bad radicalized. They're not leaders. They're sort of a violent, dystopic type of vision that they're trying to enforce. And then you see good leaders who care about their nations, nationalist leaders who also want peace on an international stage. So it seems to define throughout. They want economic balance. They realize you can't hoard everything. You have to share. They want their people to be healthy, and they want to have a peaceful coexistence and prosperity. So it's sort of obvious throughout. Anyone who's trying to achieve that tends to get the boot. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we're shifting out of that. I mean, what is your opinion? You've studied history. Do you think we're capable of coming up from under this as a human species? Because this is cycles upon cycles upon cycles. A lot of people are hopeful with Donald Trump. I am as well. I mean, I think he's done a great cutting off of these evil fruits, the gender ideologies, so destructive in our schools, all of these mutilation of our kids, all of that wokeness and the censorship. He seems to be taking aim at it, as well as he's always been trying to negotiate economic peace and prosperity. We don't currently have anyone in Canada who looks like that. We've got a bunch of neocons warmongering on either side. And, all Trudeau talks about is how we have to suffer more and more for the green agenda. And, Polyev pushing war with Iran. He has nothing to say now. Even in the media came out that his MPs can't say anything. All they can do is the fake slogans, axe the tax, build the homes, high density homes, of course, in 50-minute cities, balance the budget, although he wants to send more money to Ukraine and bomb Iran. He doesn't seem to have a peaceful, rational position, and he's all caught up in the sustainability agenda and has voted for it. So, we really don't have any strong, moral, I'd say truly nationalistic, positive, peace-loving leaders yet. So, hopefully good common sense will prevail in the next election. We'll have some PPC candidates or people who understand the formula, which there really is, and we can start rebuilding our country, our industry, our rail, our infrastructure, and promote peace internationally. It's not complicated. It doesn't seem complicated at all. And then also, get our money system in order. You talked about BRICS and gold-backed currencies. We've previously talked, if anyone wanted to refer to our other podcast, about how the financial system was hijacked. We moved away from Glass-Steagall in Canada and having the pillars of balance. And these nationalized banks were allowed to get away with absolute incredible corruption with the money printing. So please refer back to that. But as we close off, what do you see just in the last, I'll give you the last thing on what could transpire with Iran, and then maybe tell people where they can find you in some of your books, because I highly recommend them. And they're really interesting too. Really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I suppose, and I share your frustration, and I do hope as well that more PPC candidates can acquire some strength and support and organize to really start getting some access to power, because the oligarchy is quite good at using power, political power. The regular people are not so good at it. We've been sabotaged from learning those lessons of how to acquire political power and how to utilize it by design. I mean, there's certain people that don't obviously want the majority to have that type of sensitivity and knowledge and capacity. So that takes work. And definitely what you're doing is great as far as capacity building, showing as a good role model, what an actual citizen does. As far as, we're in a burning building. Well, what you do is you ideally put out the fire to save the building. If not, you direct your family out of the building, but you got to do something. You can't just sit there waiting for it to get hotter and hotter. Right. So good on you. The other thing is, I would be very, very, I think that we'd have many fewer chances of survival had we not had the fortune of seeing the emergence of responsible, mature statecraft, of leaders, unfortunately not those in our part of the transatlantic sector, but we do see responsible, mature thinking and strategizing, flanking, and also an appreciation for culture and long-term economic thinking from Russia, China, India, increasingly. Iran has impressed me immensely, looking at the quality of their temperance, their withholding. They've been baited so many times. They haven't bit the bait. A lot of African countries are currently seeing through the strength and support being provided by the Eurasian powers, including a rehabilitated Saudi Arabia that's largely thrown off many of the worst traditions that it has had as a stooge, a proxy for Anglo-American imperialism and Islamicism for decades and decades. We've seen actually a reversal of that under MBS, Mohammed bin Sultan, since 2017, and a big takedown, a draining of the Saudi swamp. And I think Trump has been able to resonate with that. UAE, same thing. Very big turn, a break from their profile, which is wonderful. We see, like I said, the expansion of the BRICS has brought online a whole series of things to work with, new credit issuing mechanisms that could feasibly, it's not evolved as fast as I would have liked, but I guess, it's complex. But we have seen things move towards an alternative economic architecture. A new alternative to the SWIFT has been increasingly brought online with a BRICS system, a BRICS analog, and also bilateral analogs that allow for the payment and settlement of transactions across borders between India, Russia, China, India, Iran, China, Iran, onward. And Africa too. There's a big Pan-African Renaissance movement happening right now in Ethiopia, where you have the Grand Renaissance Dam, the biggest dam in history that's been built, finalized, backed, and funded entirely by the Ethiopian people. It's inspiring. They didn't take a loan from the IMF. They took the Gaddafi method, did it themselves. You have China building high-speed rail lines in all parts of the world. They've got 40,000 kilometers they've built up in only 16 years inside of China itself, and externally they're helping other nations do this themselves with rail lines, the most advanced sort in Ethiopia, Djibouti, that connect down into Tanzania. One of the biggest development sectors right now, Rwanda, also benefiting greatly with a Mombasa, a rail line in Mombasa connecting. I forget which, but anyway, there's programs that even extended up through Sudan. So from Ethiopia up into Sudan and Egypt, there's already rail on the ground being built up. Water projects, African railways. Wow. There's 9 of them that have been designed by the Africa Union. And one of them is moving ahead really nicely, which ironically occurs over those nations that have seen France and American military bases kicked out. Niger, Burkina Faso. So there's a whole slew of these that have suffered a lot of imperialism, and that are now seeing a new generation of youth that have decided to take control and nationalize their economic debt, the different things that the French and the Americans, the British and the Belgium have formally privatized for generations. So that's happening. South America. Yeah. Wow. South America as well. Like you got in Brazil, Peruvian advanced railway that China's built with a $3 billion port in Peru, which is part of a rehabilitation industrial program for South America. That's one of the reasons why the Green Berets in the US, the CIA, are working very hard to destabilize these various Latin American governments, like they did to Argentina, or what they've been trying to do to Maduro, or a variety of them. They're also trying to destabilize Brazil for this reason too, because Brazil is part of the BRICS. So, and there's agents and fifth columnists and deep state operators everywhere. But the point is, they're doing a better job using their national power to protect their civilizations, their values. And they're doing it with a pretty good method that we could learn from. And I think that Trump does want to, his instincts, I believe, are to go along with those types of constructive oriented policies to help.
So too. Yeah.
So that's something to work with,
I think so. I mean, people, call him all sorts of things, but when you look at his fruits, Matthew 7, you'll know them by the fruits. Incredible what he unleashed, and he's uniting. I think there's been such a divide, and no one wants a civil war. And you could see the love of his people, that all things are creating unity. And even recently, someone said, "Do you want to get vengeance on those who have just done horrible things to you?" And he said, "No, I'm not into that." Really, really important. Good. So yeah, on that note, I mean, thank you so much. Your brilliance and photographic memory is just unbelievable. So people follow, there's all sorts of topics you can find. Where can people find you? You want to bring up your book and just give people, you have one here. I'll bring it up to the stage.
Oh yeah, well there's a couple. Yeah, so there's 2 of my 4-volume Clash of the Two Americas. People can pick those up on CanadianPatriot.org. The Untold History of Canada book series is also easily available there. I think people can buy the hard copies, the PDFs. Write to me if you want a signed copy of these things. I can send you signed copies. They're like $20 each. The new Science Unshackled. Well, I released it last year. That's out.
Really?
Yeah, wow. It's a book on restoring causality in a world of chaos, going through the subversion of science for the last 2,000 years, and a lot of really fun.
Wow, I would like to get that. Yeah,
I'll mail you a copy.
Wow, I really like that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, it was a fun one, and I see it sort of as a final sequel to the Clash of the Two Americas. And Cynthia, as you know, has also, her books are also on my website. She just released her newest book. You might actually want to have her on for a chat.
I'd love to.
Yeah, it's on how the Smithsonian, the anthropologists, the Darwinian social engineers manipulated the natives of North America in order to, again, justify a genocide in the 19th century, and that continues to this present day. And she goes through how that's connected to some of the social engineering that's trying to induce a civil war in America today. So that book is also, it was just released last week, and it's on my website. Yeah.
Wow. You guys are so prolific. And the other thing, people, I won't take much more of Matthew's time, but I just want to introduce the idea. Matthew came to one of my town halls. We had like a really incredible turnout, and he talked about these really positive ideas for Canada's future, so we aren't so black-pilled, is the rebuilding of the Bering Strait. So if we can recognize Russia isn't our enemy, they've reached out so many times to work with us, offered billions of dollars. Opening up these corridors could just unleash incredible economic progress and prosperity in the future. So, I mean, he's got films on some of these things that I think people should check out. Are all your films, your short films and documentaries on CanadianPatriot.org as well, Matthew?
Oh yeah, you can find those, including the one you just referenced here, the Arctic is a Theater of War or Global Cooperation. That's easy to find on the right side of my Canadian Patriot, and you'll find a lot of these things also on RisingTideFoundation.net, which is our nonprofit, which has some of these videos as well that people can see.
Okay, well, that is fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And we've just scratched the surface. We're so lucky. I'm so lucky to have you on my show. We're lucky to have Matt as a Canadian patriot fighting for a better future. So thank you. Thanks again. Give him a big cheer and thank you, and support him and his wife, because, and also you have an incredible Substack. So please support the people who are stepping up and also educating us. And Matthew's being asked to speak everywhere internationally now. So very, very grateful that you're on Team Canada. So thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Tish. And I'm glad to be on your team. I'm glad to be on Team Canada too.
We'll talk soon. Okay,
all right,
take
bye.
care.